After having been missing for 2 books and 13 years, we find that Theon has survived the sack of Winterfell by the Bastard of Bolton. Now Ramsay is captive. Theon is imprisoned in the dungeon of the Red Fort. Brutally tortured and starved, Theon has been reduced to eating rats he managed to catch in his cell. He has lost a number of fingers, toes, and teeth, and now answers to the name of Reed. He is eventually removed from his cell by the two Walder Freys. He thinks of overpowering them and escaping, but quickly rejects the idea on remembering the last time he escaped. Aided by Kyra, he had managed to escape the Dread Fort, but they had been hunted down soon after, which it turns out is Ramsay's favorite sport. After he is removed from his cell, Ramsay informs him that they are to go and fetch home Ramsay's bride, Lord Eddard Stark's daughter, the Lady Arya. But Moat Cailin, occupied by the Ironborn left behind by Victarion, stands between Ramsay and his bride. Ramsay promises Theon that if he can deliver Moat Cailin to Ramsay, his living conditions will improve. Theon enters Moat Cailin under a peace banner and realizes the Ironborn have already lost and are slowly being kicked out by the Cranach. Theon manages to convince them to surrender, which they do, and then they are promptly flayed by Ramsay. With Moat Cailin free, Roose Bolton can pass, bringing with him Lady Arya. Only when Theon sees her, he realizes it's not Arya at all, but Jane being passed off as Arya. Having delivered Moat Cailin to Ramsay, his condition vastly improves as promised. Not only does he receive a skin of strong wine as a prize, he also gets to sleep with the dogs and share their food, sitting in a cell and starving. The three Freys, Jared, Simon, and Rhaegar, who had separated from Wyvern Manderly's host in order to reach the north sooner, have disappeared, and Ramsay is tasked to find them, but there is no trace of them to be found. The Freys obviously blame Lord Manderly. Roose Bolton decrees that Ramsay and fake Arya will be married at Winterfell, and he then retrieves Theon from Ramsay's possession. Theon does not understand why until the day of the wedding, when he is told that he is to give away the bride, thereby attesting that she is indeed the real Arya Stark, who all the North gathered and fell. As Theon walks to the Great Hall after the wedding in the Godswood, he notices that despite Roose Bolton's hurried rebuilding efforts, most of Winterfell is still in ruin. At the wedding feast, Wyman Manderly has provided food and drink, including 3 huge wedding pies, which he insists everyone, even going so far as serving them himself. After the feast, Ramsay has Theon bring his wife to his bedchamber and then forces him to undress and ready her for the consummation. As all of Winterfell waits for Stannis to arrive with his army, Abel the Bard's washerwoman begin to press Theon for details of how he Winterfell sold men. Theon refuses to tell them anything, and soon after is ordered by Lady Dustin to show Winterfell's rifts. He escorts her there, and as they talk, Theon starts admitting to himself that he had always wanted to be one of the Starks, and that had been the driving force behind him wanting to take Winterfell for himself. As winter gets worse and worse, bodies begin to turn. A Rizwell man-at-arms, then a Frey squire, a flint crossbowman, and even Yellow Dick, one of the bastard boys. These mysterious deaths, along with the worsening storm, only serve to increase the animosity among Roose Bolton's bannermen, especially the Freys and Manderlys. Most of Winterfell's inhabitants seek warmth and shelter in the Great Hall, and as Theon leaves to avoid them, he comes across a hooded stranger who names him Kinslayer. Stannis finally arrives, and everyone inside Winterfell's walls accept attack, but all they get is incessant horn-blowing and drumming. With everyone's minds occupied by the impending attack, the washerwoman again approached Theon, this time in the Godswood, with a plan to rescue fake Arya, and Theon finally. The situation between Lord Manderly and the Freys finally comes to a head when Little Wilder is found dead. When Hostine Frey attacks and injures Wyman Manderly, orders both the Frey and Manderly men to go out and fight Stannis. In the confusion that follows, Abel and the washerwoman, along with Theon, put their plan into action. Theon escorts the 6 women, armed with buckets of boiling water, to fake Arya's, telling the guards to bark. Once inside, one of the women switches clothes with Jane, and they safely leave the tower. But when they reach the curtain wall, Jane screams when the washerwoman kills the guards. The crossbowmen on the walls hear this and start firing quarrels at them. But Theon grabs Jane and jumps the curtain wall onto the snowdrifts below. They are found by Mor's Umber, who sends them to Stannis' camp, where Arya comes across them and fails to recognize Theon. That's it. Okay, something that, which is pretty commonly believed is, Theon's been castrated. So everyone believes that, right?
I believe that.
Yeah. Well, not just castrated, but the whole situation has been,
Because, he just
those,
thinks repeatedly, I'm not a man, I'm not, he doesn't allow them to touch him. So there are a number of indications.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he was also, like, abused sexually by Ramsay, as the relationship between the former Rick and Ramsay seemed to be,
There's this one point where Theon is thinking, anything but that, and he doesn't define what that means, but I immediately got the impression that, he'd been sexualized by Ramsay.
Yeah, and Lady
where he was Ramsay forced him to have sex with the dogs.
Oh god.
Or he was castrated anyway.
Dogs. He makes Jane have sex.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and he makes Theon do other things to Jane. I mean, they're both getting abused, being forced to do things to each other. It's a really unpleasant situation for them.
I know a lot of Theon's chapters are very different.
Oh yeah, they were for me the low light of if you will, of Dance, and I think everyone felt that way of like, oh geez, and you start to feel bad for Theon after hating him for so long, and and hoping that he's dead, or like, oh yeah, good, this is happening to him. Then you start to realize, wait a minute, for all the things he did.
This is getting bad.
Yeah.
Actually, the point I started, like Theon again, I didn't like the beginning at all, but when I started liking him, sort of, was when he starts thinking, when he starts accepting to himself that the Starks were his family, they were the family that he wanted to belong to, that he should have been with Robb, he died with Robb, that's sort of the point where I came around from liking him again.
Yeah, I really like those chapters. I mean, they are very, as you say, very gruesome and hard to read, but I think they're really well written. And yeah, I agree. You do sort of start to sympathize, not so much with Theon's decisions, but with his kind of this kind of struggle of identity he felt when he was with the Starks, and why he chose Greyjoys, and how much he regrets that, and how much it sort of eats him up inside that he was forced to make that decision, and that neither family truly embraced him. He was never a Stark, even though he was treated as a son. He was never a son. He never felt at home there. But he was, when he went back to the Greyjoys and expected this big welcoming home ceremony, he got nothing. He got nothing but spite from the Greyjoys, who had poured all of their sort of discontent over the failure of the rebellion into him. So he is a very tragic character. I mean, I don't rationalize or justify any of the things he does in 2. I mean, he does some horrible things in 2, and it's really hard to read. Especially the chapter where he exhibits the bodies of those 2 Miller's boys. But he is a really interesting character, and it's interesting to see him transform and reshape. And it's almost at this point, it'd be easier just to watch him die. I mean, that'd be the most. He seems like a psychologically broken individual. But I mean, he's still alive, so he might have some part to play, and maybe he can regain some level of peace.
I think, but Theon's psychological problem started long before Ramsay. There was this one line in his chapters where he's thinking. He sees Master Luwin's ravens sitting in the broken tower, and he thinks, where else can they go? This is their home. And then he thinks, that must be so strange to have a home. And he just starts from then. It's so true. He's never had a home. Even when he was still in the Iron Islands for Balon's rebellion, he was beaten pretty harshly by his brothers. He's probably he was sort of physically abused by his own brothers. And then he's passed off in war to strange cold lord, and then expected to live there he does live there for the next 10 years. And so I think Ramsay might have tortured him, but Theon's problem started way back as a kid.
Yeah, for sure. It's not that we excuse the things that he's done, but we understand them.
Yeah. He's reacting. He's sort of, even when he's taking Winterfell, he's trying to make this his own, because Winterfell can never be his. The Iron Islands, realize that they can't be there. He just wants something of his own, and his reaction to all of that is, taking Winterfell from Robb.
Well, yeah, it's a mix of things. He wants a castle of his own, but he also wants to get the sort of love of his family. Thinks this is what'll get the love of his family. And I do think, as you said, he is horribly psychologically and physically tortured by Ramsay, but you can see that line of struggling identity sort of carried over into that torture, and that the idea of Ramsay taking away his selfhood and his identity is kind of an extension of Theon's own trauma during 2, when he's trying to figure out who he is and try and claim an absolute identity. I sort of see him
again.
I sort of see him as a bit of a. Sorry, go Jill.
I was just going to say again with the theme of identity. Yeah, but go ahead.
I was going to say I sort of see him as a counterpoint to Jon, who also has this struggle of being part of a family, but not being a part of a family, and wanting to claim this idea of lordship and being the head of a family, but not having that framework. So he's sort of, I mean, he's obviously the opposite. He's a very honourable, morally decent person, and he goes off to the wall.
John was slightly different, because at least he had the love of his siblings. His father loved him, his siblings loved him. At least he had that. Theon didn't have that. Rob, he's close to Rob.
I think
so
he had Rob's love.
Thought of as he had Rob's love, but all the rest. He didn't have a father figure. He had a father figure, but have a father's love. Okay, John and Theon both didn't have a mother there, but at least John had his sister Arya, and he had Rob, and he was close to Bran as well. So it was. I think John is more stable with that, because at least it was his home. It was the only home that he had ever known.
Yeah, but he was always made feel unwelcome within it by Lady Cailin.
He was, but Theon obviously was an outsider. John didn't have his own death hanging over his head all the time. Theon did.
Oh, I don't know if he felt that he had death hanging over his head. I think
he was old enough to understand that he was a horse, right?
That's true. Yeah, no, you're right.
So at least John didn't have that hang over his head all.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I remember in the Beyond the Wall book talking about this argument of Theon, obviously having what we would call PTSD, but living in this condition black that is identified in soldiers who've returned from war. I'm like sitting right by my bookshelf, so I can just open that up. Those in condition black generally engage coping mechanisms that most external viewers would perceive as negative. And he's in a permanent condition black, basically, is what this particular author is asserting. Yeah.
What is condition black?
It's just you're so traumatized that you can no longer function.
Okay, so you're sort of floating.
Yeah, some freeze up, go catatonic, and fail to react to future traumatic events, essentially letting the world have its way with them. Alternately, those in condition black may actively engage in self-destruction through means of compulsive behavior, such as drugs, alcohol, or sex addiction. So I think we've seen Theon do both of those things.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, he does use sex as a kind of sort of an antidote to stress. Or there's that horrible scene in book 2 where he basically brutalizes Kyra, I think it is, after hearing some really stressful news. So I think you can see that sort of sexual compulsive behavior to displace trauma or distress. Yeah. I'm wondering what sort of Theon's role in the next book will be, or the next couple of books. Will he just be executed by Stannis? Or because he has Stannis would. I mean, if anyone's going to execute Theon, it's going to be Stannis Grimes.
Yeah, but I don't.
Well, I think at this point, since Theon wants a clean death, I don't think he's getting.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't, because we've gotten all these chapters devoted to Theon, and we've gone into great detail about what has happened to him and the change he's undergone. And I just don't feel like it's going to be for nothing. I just don't think that, because some of the chapters we've already seen from Winds of Winter is this prolonged negotiation going on between Asha and Stannis about what should happen to Theon, and I just feel like it's one of those, the lady doth test too much situations, that it's been built up so much that Theon is going to end up living to a ripe old age. That's my take on it. Yeah,
I think you could argue there is a sense of closure at the end of A Dance of Dragons. I think more so than any other character, there is a sense that he's regained his identity. I mean, the final Reek chapter is titled Theon, so he's reclaimed his identity. He calls himself Theon to Asha, so there is this sense of fulfillment that is kind of, as happy ending as you can get for a character this brutalized. So I think death at this point would must be a happy ending, but as you say, it's probably not the ending it's going to get. I mean, Asha might try and take it with her back to the Iron Islands, as in accordance with her plan to dispute Euron's Kingsmoot. But I can't think of any other role he might play. I mean, he's so weak at this point. He doesn't really have too much agency of his own. I think he's just going to be used, pawned by other characters. But I am glad at least he did get that sense, reclaiming his identity. And that is a theme you sort of see in many characters in Book 5. This idea of having to deny their own identity. You see it with Arya and Sansa, and even Jon to a point, sort of denying his Stark identity, and Quentin even. I mean, there's plenty of other characters, but yeah, it's an interesting theme.
Yeah, and we could also see.
Actually,
I just want to quickly say that we can sort of see Theon reclaiming his identity is maybe the beginning of the turn of that tide of all these characters who've had to repress who they are. And John made the choice, but he hasn't done it yet. He wasn't able to because he was killed. Well, whereas Theon has fully regained his identity. So he's the first one to do it. So maybe we're going to see more, and Dany too. And Daenerys, I mean, I was actually just reading some really good essays about what the whole Dance with Dragons, what her arc really, in terms of her coming around to, being the conqueror that she's meant to be. But again, she hasn't really done it yet. She's on the verge of doing it, but
she gets on a dragon, which is, I think, a big step. Reclaiming her Targaryen identity. And Nadia, you mentioned on the forums for the last episode, Aemon Targaryen, or Maester Aemon, who actually, throughout the whole series, his arc has been about being a maester, setting aside his Targaryen identity. But in the final moments of his life, he hears about Daenerys Targaryen, and like Jon, he has this burst of sort of family loyalty. He says, "I'm gonna go, Targaryenness. I'm gonna go across the narrow seas and meet this last sort of scion of House Targaryen and help her." He sort of sets aside his maestership, which he's cultivated for like 80 years or something, and says, "I'm a Targaryen." So I think you do see that unbreakable family link, which a lot of characters are trying to deny for various reasons. I think in Jon's case, it's because of the pain associated with being a Stark, especially after the Red Wedding. But a lot of them cannot break that link, and once it's sort of pulled on, they quickly revert back to their ingrained sort of family identity.
I think with Master Aemon, it was also the reason was also that he thought his entire family was dead. They were brutally murdered. They were hunted down and killed. And suddenly, he has the chance for his family to, get back what they've lost, get the power they've lost. And obviously, all the Targaryens for so many years have been obsessed with, getting dragons. And suddenly, he has this Targaryen girl who's managed to have 3 dragons. And it's just this. All the Targaryens seem to associate their identity with having a dragon, with being a dragon. And suddenly, he realizes, somebody's managed to achieve that. And Maester Aemon is such a beautiful character in all his chapters, in all of it. And suddenly, at the very end, in the last chapter, in Sam's chapter where he dies, there's this sort of desperation to him, which wasn't there before at all. And it's not just about facing death. It's just, he thinks that, this is the wrong time to die. He would have been fine if he had died before he'd heard of Dany. But once he's heard of her, all of it comes back to him, his family, what it all meant to him.
Yeah, I think you can definitely make that sort of parallel with Jon, where he thinks all his family have been killed, and he denies his Starkhood. But once he hears that Arya might be alive, I mean, it's a fake, but he doesn't know that. He sort of, this hope just sort of kindles within him, just like Aemon.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to go to the whole Southern ambition / Northern conspiracy theory. I think the first time we have evidence of that is in Theon's chapters when who's the lady's name?
Dustin, Lady Dustin.
Yeah, Lady
Ask,
Dustin is
what is the Northern conspiracy theory? I know about the Southern ambitious one, but I'm not sure about it.
It's the same thing.
I think they're actually. Well, no, I don't. I think they're separate, aren't they? They're separate sort of movements. Because the Southern ambition was about this kind of alliance between sort of 5 of the 7 kingdoms to sort of get more power over the land.
The Targaryens.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily overthrow them, but at least have a stronger voice in the politics of the land. Maybe I don't know. It's sort of not elucidated on. But you have these various lords who are sort of war buddies from the War of the Nine Penny Kings, Lannister, Stark, Baratheon, Arryn, and Tully, and they form these various marriage alliances prior to conflict of the Mad King. So it's sort of all of these alliances are set in place, and marriage alliances between kingdoms are actually quite rare. It's usually between lords of a self-contained kingdom or region. So people have extended on from that there was this conspiracy, this marriage conspiracy of alliances between kingdoms to gain greater control over the realm. But I think that's a bit different from the Northern conspiracy, which is more about restoring a king in the north. That all of these lords of the north are conspiring to pit Bolton against Baratheon, sort of take sides on both, pit them against each other, and whoever's left standing at the end will be easily taken down, and they can install either Jon Snow or Jon Stark, as the royal decree proclaims, or Rickon Stark as maybe a backup plan.
But that would be a more recent conspiracy, whereas Lady Dustin is talking about something going back several generations.
Yeah. That was prior to Robert Rebellion.
I think she was talking more about Rickard Stark than...
Yeah, Rickard Stark. Who's the Baratheon? God.
Stefan Baratheon.
Stefan? Yeah, Stefan Baratheon,
was
Hoster
Robert
Tully,
Baratheon's father.
Jon Arryn, and Tywin Lannister. They'd set up these various marriage pacts. There was a pact between Lyanna and Robert Baratheon, Brandon and Catelyn Tully, and Jaime Lannister and Lysa Tully, yeah. So, which is quite rare, marriage pacts sewn between kingdoms, so positive potential.
And all at the same time.
That's right, yeah. And obviously Eddard and Robert being fostered in the area.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting that, both these young lords, both Robert and Ned, were like shipped off as young boys, which does seem to be a fairly common thing. But if you decide to connect the dots, you can make that connection for sure.
And what was interesting about the Southern Ambitions is it sort of gives a bit of credibility to the Mad King's kind of outrage. I mean, he might have sort of seen this alliance falling into place and getting really freaked out by it, and that might have accounted for some of his outrage and madness. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, because he did seem to have Aerys seemed to have quite a sudden flip, and we were never really told if it's like the culmination of years and years of instability just finally building to the point where he couldn't hold it anymore, or if it was triggered by something.
And it also explains why
by Duskendale, right?
Yeah. Well, no, sort of Tywin getting nervous about Tywin being influenced. People were saying Tywin the truth, and then he tried to
what
solve
happened
Dustin
was when he was captive at Duskendale, Tywin just said, okay, send him out or we're destroying. And obviously Aerys was still inside, right? So he would have destroyed the whole town, including Aerys. So Barristan sort of snuck in and snuck Aerys out, but I think that's where Aerys finally broke. He was like, he would have killed me.
Yeah, that sort of follows his discontent with Tywin. He tried to solve the Duskendale situation by himself, and they just took him hostage. And then Tywin had to come and rescue. So I think that's where the madness began to manifest itself more extremely. Going back to the Southern Ambitions, it does sort of explain why there was this infrastructure at the kicking off of Robert's Rebellion. Like right from the beginning, they had these 4 or 5 kingdoms. Well, maybe you can't count the Stillins, they sort of backed out. But you had at least kingdoms immediately in alliance with each other. And that was right there from the beginning. And they had a strong sort of force in place to engage the Targaryens.
As if they were waiting for something like this to happen.
That's right, yeah.
Anyone want to talk about Brandon's bloody sword?
Talk about what?
Really?
Brandon and his obsession with bloody swords.
Oh,
he deflowered Lady Dustin. He loved the sight of a
Well, I think that's just speaking to the fact that he just loved to bed any young woman he could get his hands on.
Yeah,
and Barbary Dustin seems to think that he was in love with her. I don't think he was. He was just probably using her.
Well, he's probably like Robert. He's in love with a woman for an hour.
Exactly.
Discards.
Probably.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I think that Lady Dustin has already been identified as a unreliable narrator. So,
well, part of it's interesting that Lady Dustin sort of hates the Starks so much. I saw it as a bit of a counterpoint to the Manderlys' kind of love and the fact that sort of pettier vassals, the Starks, worship them so much that they would just offer their maiden daughters up on a plate to them. But I've heard sort of theories that this is part of a scheme to make them think that there isn't this united love for the Starks, that she's actually pretending to hate the Starks, when actually it's all part of the mummer's farce.
I think
that's sort of part of the...
I think we're just at the point where we're reading way too much into it.
That's the fun of it.
Yeah, but I mean, you get to a point where you're starting to come up with really insane theories. Like, I think the most insane fan theory I've yet heard is about Dany and the idea that Quaithe is actually Dany's future self come back from the future to warn her. And I heard that, and I was like,
time traveling.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Oh, yes. This is the song of my people, the crack theory. This is what we do.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the level of detail and complexity that fans are able to draw all these elaborate theories out. I think there is some sort of credibility to the Southern Ambition. I mean, obviously it is making a lot of leaps and specking, but there's a couple of keystones and a couple of illogicalities could be explained by that frame.
Well, yeah, there were definitely a lot of alliances falling into place at the same time. A lot of marriages, happening at exactly the same time. There could definitely be something to that.
I mean, the simple phrase "Southern Ambition" has to allude something. I don't know. Although it does sort of speak to that Lady Dustin is genuinely discontent with the way the Starks comported themselves 15 years ago. So maybe
obviously she's been rejected in favor of Cailin Tully, so she'd be offended by it.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of speaks to the idea that she probably is telling Theon that she generally does hate the Starks. I think the Southern Ambitions conspiracy probably has more in the credibility than the Northern conspiracy theory, in my opinion.
Yeah, one thing I'm wondering... Go ahead.
Sorry, there's just a couple of reading over the Northern theory, there's some interesting stuff, especially with Lady Stoneheart. But there is a couple of pretty big leaps in logic. But we can discuss that maybe later if we want.
Yeah, what I was going to say...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, from the author's point of view, in terms of what George is actually doing, this is something that I've been wondering more and more, as the series goes on, is he sort of maybe backtracking to fill in some of his own plot hole, to explain, why was it that these several regions were able to rise up in concert so quickly after the Starks, after Brandon and his father were killed. Is he going and, because originally he envisioned these books as just a trilogy, and he over the course of beginning to write them, realized that it was going to be much more than that, and that there is just so much material that he hasn't been able to get it into. As we know, Dance and Feast were supposed to be one book originally, and he had to split them because it just became too much. So I'm wondering if this whole Southern Ambition conspiracy theory is him going back to try to explain something that either bothered him as an author, or something that one of his editors said to him, or even fans. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, he's described it as a story told in two directions almost. You got the forward actual narrative of the War of the Five Kings, but then you have this slowly unfolding narrative of what happened in the past with Robert's Rebellion and Lyanna and Rhaegar and all those things. So it's fun to fill in those gaps, and it sort of casts light on some of the events that are happening in real time.
Well, I think that the best analogy I've ever heard series is it's historical fiction for history that never happened.
Yeah,
and I think that's it right there. It's like reading one of those those novels that are like The White Queen or The Other Boleyn Girl, that sort of thing, but there is no actual history to back up on.
You could definitely teach a history course on Westeros and Essos. Yeah, it's very detailed, very dense, even more so than something like Lord of the Rings. It's so detailed, there's so many areas explored.
Yeah, and as we know, Lord of the Rings is detailed enough as it is. And
I was just gonna say, we don't only get Brandon's preferences, we also get Bolton's, which is very weird.
Ugh, that was creepy.
Yeah, he's talking
his
about his
coldness
wife, and he
is
says,
unnerving. Yeah.
No, he was talking about his wife, and he goes like,
"Oh, sorry, you're talking about
the previous ones were just they were quiet all the time, but this one makes noises. She squeals and whimpers, and it's very enjoyable."
Yeah, I thought you were talking
very
about
weird coming from sport.
Yeah, Bruce, get it. And we're gonna get to see her next season. That role has been cast. I'm very excited because the photos I've seen of the actress, she looks to be very bubbly and it should be an interesting pairing there on screen.
Yeah, nice juxtaposition of the two characters.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking.
One thing I noticed was that I wanted to talk about was when Theon is in the Godswood, he hears Bran's voice, right? And Bran is actually Bran sees Theon in the tree through the tree, and he says Theon, right? And Theon hears him. Okay, and then Bloodraven says that you can't interfere. But obviously Theon hears someone say his name. So what if Bran had said something else? Would Theon have understood that? Wouldn't that have been sort of affecting the situation?
Well, maybe the very name Theon.
It does affect the situation because Theon sort of thinks that the old gods are communicating with him, right? And that sort of drives that eventually, drive him to sort of accept his old identity back. And that is, in a sense, changing the situation.
Is that what Bloodraven says? You can't change things. I
You
thought it was
can't do
more
it.
about.
You can just see. I think that was the impression I got, that you can just see what's happening, but you can't really affect it. You can't talk to them.
I thought that was more about things that had happened in the past. You couldn't change those things, but things that in the present you could guide.
Maybe.
But yeah, I think just the name Theon is enough. The fact that he's being referred to by his own name is enough communication that Bran needs to deliver.
It's all well and good that Bloodraven told Bran that he can't interfere. I mean, like, okay, what was he being told? Like literally, Bran, you see all this stuff, but you cannot do anything about it, or was it like a warning for him being like, you shouldn't try to do anything? Do you guys see what I'm saying?
That's me.
Yeah. So I think it was more like Bloodraven was warning Bran to be like, don't try to mess with things. That's my job. Versus but then Bran already has, and whether or not there's going to be any consequences for Bran in his newfound life as a tree, we'll see.
It might be the case that Bran was just too inexperienced at that point. I mean, that was his first attempt at peering through the weirwoods, and Bloodraven was simply saying, you can't do anything you're too inexperienced. But maybe at this point in the story, I mean, this might be up to 6 months after Bran reaches Bloodraven, he has evolved to this point where he can communicate through the trees.
But after that, right after when Theon hears him say Theon, he also hears somebody say Bran, which I think is Bloodraven calling Bran back.
Ooh.
Well,
interesting.
So, that's when he thinks, Bran was such a sweet little boy and I never wanted to harm him. So, he obviously hears somebody say Bran as well.
Does he?
Yeah, he does.
Oh, I don't remember that. That's
so.
interesting, yeah.
I didn't either. I just thought he heard Theon, but then when I read through it again, he heard somebody say Bran. He's just heard the trees say Bran.
I'm wondering if that's kind of the point that we leave Bran at for the series. We only sort of get glimpses of him sort of trying to interact with trees and ravens and things like that.
Just, this amazing line from Wyman Manderley. He has all these amazing lines.
Yes,
the one,
I know what you're talking
about. So young, though mayhaps was a blessing. Had he lived, he would have grown up to be afraid.
Burn. So
that is probably my favorite line of all time.
I love it. Yeah, I love all the Norths digging into raisin.
Yeah, it is nice to see, because for a long time we were led to believe, or at least it seemed like the phrase "we're going to get away scot-free with what they'd done," along with the Boltons as well, and that's changing. And I know that there have been essays about justice and things like that in Westeros, but I mean, this seems more like, is it justice or is it vengeance? I don't know if it really matters. But.
Both, kind of. You want to hurt these people that have killed your king, but you also want to restore your rightful king and punish those who committed a crime. I like how it's almost a reversal of what we sort of see in the first couple of books, where the Starks are in power and it's all these other little minor forces trying to poke holes in them, and now the bad guys are in power, and you think it's going to be all about them triumphing, because that's so much about what these books are about, the bad guys often winning. But now you've got all these little good guys trying to poke holes in them, or people at least loyal to the Starks trying to poke holes in them, and now it's the bad guys who are feeling the pressure of power and sort of buckling under that pressure. So it's very satisfying to see Bolton just kind of stressing out and not knowing what to do and just collapsing, and he can't hold it together.
Yeah, when Theon notices that, he's afraid, and it's kind of strange seeing fear in Bolton's eyes.
I'm wondering what you guys think is kind of the plan at this point. Like, we get that letter from possibly Ramsay declaring Stannis is dead. But I mean, is that, do you guys think that's how it turned out, or was there a battle? Or, I've heard theories where, at the end of the last Reek chapter, you see the Manderleys and the Freys sent out as a host to attack Stannis in that little village that he's stationed at. And I'm wondering if I've heard theories where the Manderleys at that point basically just slay all the Frey infantrymen and just sort of, wed themselves to Stannis's fort. What do you guys think?
That's I've always thought that's going to happen. The Manderleys are definitely stabbing them in the back. And the thing is, Stannis isn't there. They have to pass Mors Umber's force first, and then they'll be able to.
Yeah, and we already
most
know
of the
Stannis isn't
Northmen.
dead.
Yeah,
Sorry?
we don't. We
No,
but that's from the spoiler chapter. So
yeah, but we do know that he's not dead.
But the chronology is not necessarily the same. Like the last Jon chapter may take place after Stannis chapter, first Theon chapter of the sixth book. That's not necessarily that he's alive.
Nah, I'm gonna say my boy Stannis is alive. I don't think he's gonna go down that easy.
I think it might even sort of connect to the Northern Conspiracy, where people like Manderley are trying to wheel Jon Snow back into the mix because they want him to be king. So they're sort of posing these provocations to get him back to Winterfell. I mean, they've probably been around. Someone like Manderley's probably been around, like Roose and Ramsay enough to know their disposition and know how horrible they are, and know possibly that Mance Raider is there.
But
that they
how
have
would
enough
they find
information
out that it's Mance Raider? But would Mance give up his identity so willingly?
If he's being tortured the way that we're being led to believe he is.
Yeah, or that one of his...
knows who Mance Raider is, right? I mean, they don't know him by a face. He could take anybody's name and they'd believe it, right?
Yeah, but one of the washerwomen...
Yeah, maybe she talked. That's
if they're torturing the washerwoman... Oh, sorry, the wildling spearwives, one of them might have given up information about Mance, It's tough to say,
But we've been told that possibly that the washerwomen, the spearwives, have all been killed and that Mance is being forced to sleep with their remains. I mean...
what?
Wait, where did I read that? Oh, God.
Yeah, that's in the letter. Ramsay says that he's skinned the women.
He's wearing a cloak made from their skins. When is he sleeping with a dead woman?
They are dead women.
I thought like he was like forced to like sleep next to
this
their...
alive? Oh,
well, no,
God.
he's sleeping under the flayed flesh of them.
Not being forced to commit necrophilia, but like he's being forced to like be in the company of their dead bodies. That's what I meant.
That's still very beyond.
Yeah, well, it also, frankly, it sounds like something that Ramsay would do, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it does. He did flay those 3 men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the ones in Moat.
Yeah, tough to know which parts falls that letter and how it'll play out. I mean, it'd be a big shock if Stannis died. I mean, we've put so much narrative hope and narrative trajectory into this character. If he was just to die like that, I don't know what would be next in the story. I suppose
Stannis is dying.
Yeah, but I mean, George has thrown those spanners into. I wonder if maybe that would provide the sort of infrastructure Jon to step in. If all the Northern Lords were united under this one claimant, maybe if Jon steps in at that point, rides down from Castle Black, they'll sort of be able to fall in around him. And he has, of course, those 3,000, 4,000 wildlings to back him up.
Of course, there's also that other theory I've heard about if Jon is revealed to be Azor Ahai, that Stannis, being, this fair but brutal man that he is, would then be like, well, it wasn't me all along, I should take the black, and that he will somehow become the next Lord Commander and possibly final Lord Commander of the Night's Watch.
He'd be a good Lord
Commander. The thing is, Stannis is still the rightful the Iron.
As far as we know.
Even if Jon is Azor Ahai, even if he is found to be Rhaegar Targaryen's son, he's still Rhaegar Targaryen's bastard. So Stannis would still think that he's the rightful.
But he has no children.
We get proof, unless we get proof that Rhaegar and Lyanna got married.
That will only happen if Howland Reed decides to up. And that's not happening. That hasn't happened for 5 books.
I hope we see him. I want to see what's happening at the Neck. The Neck seems like an interesting place.
I just want to see Greywater Watch. How can it move?
Yeah.
I want to see Highgarden.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many places that we've heard about that we're just never going to see. Highgarden, Lannisport, Ashai.
Are you Castle Rock?
Yeah, Lannisport / Casterly Rock. I mean, they're like the same thing. Like Casterly Rock is the family seat, but like it lords over the town, the city of Lannisport. So we're just never going to see those places.
I think it might actually better that way. I think a lot of the times when George goes to these places you've heard about, it's not quite as interesting maybe as we've built up on our head, especially a lot of the world building in Essos. I mean, even Dawn, which I kind of like the Dornish chaps, but they just seemed a bit tangential plot at that point. So if he just goes to Casterly Rock or Highgardens for the sake of it, I'd quite, unless it's like a prologue chapter.
We don't really have any point of which, I mean, we can possibly go to Casterly Rock because you have Jaime and Cersei and Tyrion, but Highgarden, we don't really have any point of view characters there, so I don't think we'll ever see that.
Tyrion's possibility. I mean, he means to reclaim it, I guess.
Yeah, but not in Highgarden.
No, not for Highgarden, for Casterly Rock. I mean, they do have dragons now, so I suppose they can whiz around the world.
Yeah.
Do we actually know? I mean, we're at the point where there are so many threads in the narrative that are like pure conjecture or pure, rumor. Like there are things that we as readers know for sure that the characters don't, and then there are other parts where we're like on the same level as characters, where we're like the whole thing of like, are there actually Krakens, or is it just a game of telephone and it's just the Ironborn? attacking, that sort of thing. And we don't know what's actually happened to Loras, do we? Like, we've heard that he's been horribly wounded. You know, he kind of went on kamikaze after Renly died, and it seems like he's kind of got a death wish at this point. But, you know, as far as we know, he's still alive, but we don't know what kind of shape he's in.
Yeah, it could have been an exaggeration again.
It's also, I mean, sometimes it's difficult to know which things to take as a conspiracy. Whereas the Loras thing is like, you know, it can fold into this maybe Tyrell conspiracy where they're trying to seem like less of a threat, but actually trying to take over King's Landing. But it also might just be true, and we might just think it's a conspiracy because we haven't seen it. But, you know, I don't really want to have to introduce POV characters at Dragonstone just where this thing is. It's tricky, I guess, to balance those two things, because we question everything that we hear, but ultimately if we had to show a POV of every event to confirm it was true, then there would be no end to the POV. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it might just true that.
I hope nobody can hear my stomach growling because it's starting to get really loud.
No. I also wanted to ask what you guys thought of the hooded man that Theon comes across in his final chapter.
Because there's the ghost in Winterfell who's bumping people off, same way that happened at Harrenhal when Arya was there.
Yeah.
But the thing is, most of them, I think the washerwoman did, because at the end, when little Walder dies, Theon looks at one of the washerwomen and she says, "No, this wasn't one of ours." So I'm thinking the previous ones were killed by them.
Okay.
I don't see the purpose there. I don't see what purpose they had in killing, you know, a random crossbowman or a random squire. But, you know, she sort of accepts that, you know, we were the ones who killed the previous...
Actually, the little Walder, was it little Walder who died or big Walder? One of them is arranged to marry.
No, it was little Walder.
Oh, you're right.
Because he's arranged to marry.
The big one.
Little Walder's arranged to marry Wyla Manderly. So maybe it was the Manderlys that did it, so she wouldn't.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean, people does really dropping.
Jump to Wyman Man.
I've also heard theories that it might be like, I mean, this is pretty crazy, but people like Blackfish or Howland Reed or something like that just lurking around Winterfell. But I also heard Harwin, who's the former stable master of Winterfell.
He's the Brotherhood.
Yeah, and the Brotherhood without banners, and that's sort of connected to the Grand Northern Conspiracy.
But I think in the Grand Northern Conspiracy, there's also the possibility of Robert Glover, because we don't know where he is.
Oh,
yeah. He went into the neck. Yeah. He went into the neck last time we saw him.
I think he'd be pretty recognizable.
Would he? But he's wearing a hood. He doesn't really come inside. The other nobles might recognize him, but would the men-at-arms recognize him? He could just blend in.
I mean, there's been so much chaos in the north, and I think we're only starting to see the tip of the proverbial iceberg in terms of what Manderly and other people have been getting up to. And they're basically fighting a guerrilla war, although it isn't a full-on war at this point. They're doing what they're able to do with their limited resources, strength.
Yeah, Roose Bolton, sort of mentions that. He says, the Starks were done when Theon took Winterfell. The rest of it is just, the crows fighting over the bones. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very apt description of what's happening in the north right now.
Well, that's Bolton's perception, but I think we see a bit more, unity between the crows at this point.
Later we see all of that. Later we see, the whole plot coming together. But before it is Roose.
That's right, yeah. But I do think Bolton is starting to sense that sort of conspiracy surrounding him. He starts to get a bit nervous about the Manderlys and the Freys constantly bickering, and I think that's one of the reasons he sends them both out as a vanguard against Stannis, because he wants to rid his castle of some of these mongering, duplicitous lords.